He goes, fine, I know how I'm going to get you your money. And he goes, I have this plan. We're going to go rob a bank. Now, a normal person would just laugh that off. Right? He's getting into the car, and I'm expecting him to say, I didn't do it. I chickened out. Right. And he gets in the car, and he says, drive. And I go, wait, you did it? Yeah, I did it. Drive. Whoa. At that minute, my life's totally different. And my life's totally different from then on. 21 years old, pleading guilty, turning myself into a prison in Southern California. But it changed my life for the better.
How much was stolen?
Like $1,800 or something like that.
$1,800, that's it?
That's it. I had more money in a bank account in that bank than we walked away with.
Oh my God. What's up, everybody? Thanks for taking a minute here to listen to what I have to tell you about Gobundance membership. If you've been listening to this podcast and listening to me for any length of time, you know that Gobundance is the one catalyst to me changing my life drastically at the age of 40 plus. So for many of us out there, men and women, we struggle day to day being lone wolves in our own community, trying to figure out how do we get unstuck. I can tell you so many conversations I had with people where they couldn't resonate with me and I couldn't resonate with them. And the moment I joined Gobundance, and I've made a lot of money as a member of Gobundance, but the return that I can't calculate is the ability to show up as my authentic self and celebrate my ambitions and my achievements, but also be vulnerable and clear about my losses and my screw-ups. Joining Gobundance has given me the ability to have all of that, to have the foundation on which I can build the kind of life I want to. It's how I quit my job. It's how I moved to the Dominican Republic. It's how I have the adventures I do right now. It's how I got this podcast. It's how I founded Gobundance Emerge. It's how I partner with Quantum Capital. All of it is thanks to my investment in me and finding this community of entrepreneurial people that are driven to be the best versions of themselves. As we call it, the tribe for healthy, wealthy, generous people who choose to live epic lives. If you're listening and haven't become a member, you're sitting on the sidelines and watching life pass you by when you have the chance to invest in yourself, in your community, in your tribe, and drive your life to the next level before, God, I'm 44. I mean, it went so fast. I've got so much I want to do, but time is compressing on me. This has shortened my time horizon to where I'm trying to get to, and it can for you as well. Check out Gobundance.com, fill out an application. If you want to go directly to the Gobundance Women's side, if you're $1 million+ in net worth and a female, go to GobundanceWomen.com. And if you're at that $0 to $2 million mark for a man or $0 to $1 million mark for a woman, check out GobundanceEmerge.com. Sign up and hang out with me. I run that community like it's my life. I would love to have you a part of that. And we have given an amazing opportunity at $500 a month or $5,000 for the year to be part of a community that gets immense value from Gobundance members on a weekly basis through our millionaire case studies and everything else. Join one of these Gobundance communities, the one that's right for you. Get in the room that lets you look up at the next level so that you can achieve what you're trying to in this lifetime. Gobundance.com, GobundanceWomen.com, GobundanceEmerge.com. Check us out. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the show. Today's guest, Aaron Amuchastegui, try spelling it, is the CEO of Roddy's Foreclosure listing service. He's the host of the Real Estate Rockstars Podcast, an amazing guy, a long time. 7 years as a GoBro? 8 years as a GoBro?
Yeah, 2016, yeah.
Hey, 7 years. Holy shit. Long time GoBro, and I appreciate you coming in today, brother.
Yeah, always. It's always good to talk to you. I'm glad you made the long trip to get here, right? It was easy for me. You came it's right down the street from where I'm at, and you had a million plane flights and delays and everything else.
And the only reason I came was to see you.
Yeah, that's
it. You know what we share, besides being very sexy? We both host podcasts initially hosted by Pat Hiban.
That's brilliant,
right?
And I think we're the only two that have that in common.
I got it.
Right? We are.
That's the case.
We are totally unique in that. Yes, the podcast that I have, Pat Hiban was the original host, and I think he was hosting them both at the same time. I even remember when we were like organizing the files and like moving some. We used to use different software back then. There was the Gobundance folder, and there was the Rockstars folder. That's brilliant.
He handed them both off. He does nothing unless he was whoring around on other podcasts that we don't know about.
There might be another one out there, but as far as I know, we were the only two that he hosted and we took over.
I love it. Well, let's dive in a little because you were on this show, God, 6 years ago or whatever it was, when it was more of one sheet driven. We were talking about that.
Yeah.
But I think, people have heard your name. They know of you. They know you're especially with Real Estate Rockstars, you've done a lot with that brand. But let's go with a little bit more of the backstory. Where from? Kind of give us the beginnings of Aaron Amuchastegui.
Yeah. It's funny too, when you think about when you look at some of the old stuff, like our one sheet from like 2016, oh man, right? It's like I just joined Gobundance. I was barely able to qualify at the time. But the coolest part was I knew I was like in the right room and I was finally able to have conversations with people like me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was so pumped to be there and I was honored to get even asked to be on the podcast. And they thought my story was pretty unique back then, but a lot has changed in 6 or 7 years. But I grew up in a small town in Oregon, right? I grew up in a kind of mid-level family, a mildly successful family, but it also in the real estate construction industry. And so in the 80s, we saw a lot of big changes. We saw my dad being like a successful contractor, grandparents like pseudo developers, interest rates going crazy. My dad going from being like a successful developer to selling fireplaces door to door as he was trying to like figure out how to like essentially keep paying the bills when the market changed. We saw crazy changes in the 80s with inflation, with interest rates, things like that. And then, so I grew up like working inside my dad's company at different times, like doing manual labor for him on construction sites. And it's funny, if your parents own a business, you find yourself like going, well, why don't you do this? Well, why don't you do this? So you get to learn from them, but it's always like interjecting like, oh, if I was the boss, I would do this. If I was the boss, I would do this. It's funny. So many times my dad would say, if you were a little older or once you have the experience, you'll know why I don't do that. And he was right. Sometimes it took 30 or 40 years to realize.
Like what? Is there an example of that?
He was right.
That jumps to mind?
There was a lot of things like, why aren't you charging money for estimates like some of these other people? Why aren't you taking on this other sort of job? Most of it was like, this is your wheelhouse, but your business could be so much, because he just did the most high-end custom homes. So that was pretty cyclical though, right? Because that in really good economies, people want to spend a lot of money to like build their custom home and put everything in it. And low economies, they don't, right? So some of the advice I was giving him was like, why don't you also do like a cheaper home, like a track home type stuff, other sorts of developments so you could stay busier in good times and in bad. So it's mostly trying to say like, hey, you should just grow your business really, really huge. And even though this is your specialty, you should try to do this, 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 and this also. And I've learned in business that sometimes you can take a specialty and expand over and like do a couple jumps or like, do a couple extra products, especially with software. Like we can have software and launch a new product or launch a new product. But I think he was right in the sense that he knew what he was really, really good at. And sometimes I've seen people try to become something else. It distracts them from what they're good at. It distracts them from their niche, and then nothing becomes successful anymore. So if you know what you're really, really good at, there's value in expanding, but there's also value in just sticking in your lane.
Did he ever expand past that, or did he stay in that lane for the duration of his career?
Not really. I mean, so he went from custom homes to also doing big commercial projects, right? But he focused on clients that it was going to be, instead of having to like bid for a job and compete, it was going to be cost plus stuff. People that would trust him, and he would say, look, I'm going to do the best job, but I'm going to do the best job to do it right. I'll share what I'm paying these trades. I'm going to do a markup on it. So everything he did was cost plus. So that became like the right sort of commercial clients, right? Like big hospitals and private schools and things like that. He was able to do some other really, really big things.
Did he you mentioned it's the cyclical nature of the market, the specialty he had, and like how he had to, sell fireplaces door to door and this, that, and the other. Was that just your observation now looking back? Was that was he sort of cyclical with standard of living as well? Like, hey, in the good times, we're spending cash. So when it got tough, I didn't have the cash to get us through. Like, what did you observe in that time?
That's a really good question. I've never thought about that question. And I think because I also have lived my life cyclical, but I did it the opposite of the way he did. And I probably made a lot of mistakes in that sense. So me personally, in all of my cycles of stuff, when we were living big, we were spending money and being good. And then all of a sudden, I would get put out of business. And it was like, oh man, that was like a harsh change. I didn't do a whole lot of, until I joined Gobundance, I hadn't done a whole lot of saving for rainy day stuff. It was kind of this belief of like, oh, I'll always be able to do that. But I remember we went on our first big family vacation when I was like 15 years old.
Wow.
Right. So so by that time he had 3 or 4 cycles, and there were a couple cycles where he was, pretty successful and able to. I think about that was the first time he took us to Hawaii.
Wow.
And we all remember that as a really, really big deal. And the funny thing is my kids have been to Hawaii like 25 times. Right. And my son got to go there before he had turned 1, so there's little things about how we do stuff different. But I think in the 80s, most people were like that.
True.
Most people were a lot more careful with their money, a lot more waiting for that rainy day. Like even when times are good, you were kind of waiting for the other ball to drop. And because of the industry that he was in and had seen that with his parents, I think it probably took him a long time to be comfortable enough to go like, okay, now I have enough of a nest egg that we can start to spend it a little bit.
Wow. Okay. No, that makes sense. You got into some trouble as a late teen, I think it was, in your early 20s. Can you walk through that?
Yeah. So it was funny. So like grew up in a small town. I graduated high school with like, 30 of the people I graduated from high school with, like I went to preschool with, right? So I wasn't really good at meeting people. In high school, I was like a foot shorter than everybody else. I wasn't super secure. I was kind of
have a growth spurt.
Yeah, I did have a growth spurt, right? So now I'm like normal size, but my first few years of high school, I was like a foot shorter than everybody else. Wow. I didn't feel like I fit in really, really well. Yeah. And I wasn't really good at meeting people. And part of that was because I didn't really have to learn how, but I wasn't really comfortable with who I was. And so during that time in high school, I remember and because I was like a 4.0 student, and because my mom was she was a superintendent of city schools, and my dad had a name for himself there, people always saw me and they would kind of put a label on me. Oh, you're that nerdy kid, and they say that nerdy rich kid. And if they'd only known what it was like the first 15 years of my life, right? But then by the time I was 15, my dad built a nice house on the hill and everything else. And I didn't like it when people put labels on me. I didn't like it when people would say like, oh, because of your older sister or because of your mom, I know this is going to happen. And I started like getting into like smoking weed and partying a lot in high school. And it lit me up, Jamie, when somebody would see me smoking weed and they would go like, oh my God, you're the last person that I would think would be doing this, right? Like that's what I wanted to not be what people thought. I wanted to defy my label. Whatever label the world had put on me, I wanted to defy that. Yeah. And then I also saw but then the business side of me was always like, okay, so how much are we paying for weed? Like, what if we bought more? What would this be like? Well, if I bought a lot of weed and then I shared it with my friends or sold it to my friends, well, it was turning it in. Anything I looked at like what the business would be like. Yeah. So I quickly got into going, oh, I'm not just smoking weed. Now I'm going to buy it, and then I'm going to buy big amounts of it. I'm going to sell it to people. And then, man, the looks I got then was even cooler because then they were like, oh, wow, Aaron's the guy that if you want to smoke weed, you got to buy it from him. And I all of a sudden felt like I was like gaining this notoriety and this popularity. And so it started as like defying a label to then being like, okay, people value this. And what that really did is it started to get me down to like just pushing myself and getting myself into a lot of trouble. The summer between I'd gone up to University of Oregon for college. I'd gotten to the University School of Architecture up there, which is a big deal. And like the summer between freshman and sophomore year, I was home partying with a buddy, and we had been just partying and through that year of like getting exposed to college and also realizing that I was really not good at knowing people. So I went from like small town kid to like a university where then I could try all sorts of things. There were all sorts of other drugs to try now, and then drinking and like fraternity houses. And it was like, man, I was not ready for any of that. And that summer when I was home from school, we had started just partying and doing a bunch of crazy stuff. And, the story that you asked about, a buddy of mine and I were, we had been partying for way too long. And I'm like giving him a hard time about some money he owed me. It wasn't a lot of money. It was like $300 or $400, right? And I'm giving him a hard time of that. I'm saying, hey, what about that? Just joshing him, just messing with him. But he got tired of it, right? I'd been doing it. He goes, fine, I know how I'm going to get you your money. And he goes, here's what we're going to do. I have this plan. We're going to go rob a bank, right? Now, a normal person would just laugh that off. Right. But I'm this.
You're listening.
But I'm this I'm this entrepreneurial guy, and and I've pushed the limits a little bit, and I've talked to myself. I've convinced myself that maybe I'm a lot like more hardcore than like my upbringing or whatever. Right. So instead of like laughing it off, I said, "Tell me more. Let's start talking about this." The obviously horrible decision making. Normal people, like I know that I'm not normal. I know that everything I do very, very extreme. I had a counselor once when I'd gotten in a lot of trouble tell me if I could just take those things and turn like the volume down to 90, like the habit of always wanting to be the best at everything, which meant I had to be the best student, but I also had to be the best pot smoker, and I had to be the best drug and everything else. I had to be the best at everything. Well, if I could like turn that into like a 90% volume and do it for good, then I could do a lot of good in the world. So the long story short is I tell him, fine, okay, we're driving to the bank, and we're both two young kids at that point playing in a game of chicken. And that game of chicken is, I'm hoping that he says, I'm not going to do this. I've chickened out. Oh, God. So then I can say, all right, dude, like I knew you were full of crap. Like I'm harder than you. Now let's go back and keep partying. Oh, man. And he's hoping I'm going to say, no, dude, you don't have to do this. We're not going to do this.
Do you know this now? Like talking to him like after the fact?
Yeah.
This is not an assumption. This is
not an assumption. This is real deal. Wow. Like both of us really didn't think the reality of this was going to happen.
Oh my God.
No, I mean, think back to like when you're younger, think back to foggy times, think back to even a time when you've had like a couple drinks, right? And a conversation is going and you're like, is this real? Is this reality? I mean, definitely like we're guilty. Like we deserved, the punishments we got with it. But so the reality is we're playing this game of chicken And neither of us knows we're playing a game of chicken at that time, but I'm thinking, God, I hope that he just chickens out and does this. I'm saying he's not really going to do this. And he's saying, Aaron's not really going to let me do this. And when it came down to it, I remember when he got out of the car, I go to drive to a different spot to pick him up. He's getting into the car, and I'm expecting him to say, I didn't do it. I chickened out.
Right.
And he gets in the car, and he says, drive. And I go, what happened? And I go, wait, you did it? And he goes, yeah, I did it. Drive. And whoa. Right? Whoa. At that minute, my life's totally different.
Yeah.
And my life's totally different from then on. From there's times in life when people can do a lot of good, a lot of amazing. One bad decision changes everything. We don't think about that enough when we're in the moment. You think about these good coaches that get canceled because of something else crazy. Like one bad thing, one bad move can really set you back. And that was one of those moments where everything changed. As we're driving away, man, what a bunch of young, dumb kids. Now, there was part of us that were like, whoa, we really are this, going into that other part of our persona. Wow, we are hardcore. Wow, we're intense. Like all this different thing. Man, we had no idea what we didn't know. But pretty soon after that, my dad reached out to me because my car was spotted in the area. They called him about it. He knew that I was up to no good, doing drugs all the time. And he was like, I don't think you probably did this. But he thought that maybe one of my friends had stolen my car to do it.
Sure. So
he wanted to talk to me about it. And that was kind of what he had led on to the attorney and the district attorney of I think Aaron's involved. But so the long story short of that is my attorney goes and works a deal. Says, hey, these guys will tell you everything they know. But as a result, they're not going to do, what sort of deal you can give me. And the deal they gave us was ended up doing 30 days of jail time, wouldn't have a permanent felony on our record. I'd have to go to rehab, all these things. Cool. We're good. We booked this deal. I start telling them everything I know. And everything I know was a lot more intense than they were hoping that it was.
Oh, God.
Right? And I'm like, hey, this is my get out of jail free card. I'd been partying for a lot of years. Now I'm finally going to have a clear slate. Here's all the things that I ever did wrong. going to confession.
Yeah, sure.
Catholic confession, right? Here's all the things I ever did wrong. Let me get this past me and I can go do that. Because also when you're in that lifestyle, you have times when you're like, man, I shouldn't be doing this anymore. But it's not easy to get out of, out of that.
Yeah.
I'm over in rehab thinking I had, got my deal set up. I'm now 2 weeks clean at the time. And I got a call from my attorney, said, hey, you need to talk to this other attorney now. It's a federal attorney that's being assigned to you. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you're getting indicted by the federal government for this. And I'm like, well, what do you mean?
I wouldn't have thought that. There's two different
governments.
Well, I mean, yeah, but they can both come in on two different types of charge. I didn't know this.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing, right? So the federal government can't take over any sort of charge, but they can in certain cases. And so banks are one of them, right? Wow. So if you rob a bank, it is supposed to be a federal offense, not a city offense. Now, the way that the city was going to do it was it won't be a federal charge. It's going to be something different. So you can get into different legalities of it. I was shocked too. What do you mean? I've already got my deal. And what they said was, well, you shouldn't have been given the deal you were given, right? We wouldn't have given that to you if we were brought in sooner. The city didn't have the right to honor that deal for you. And so we aren't going to honor it. And so now we're indicting you federally. And I was like, oh my gosh, federal government's different.
Yeah.
Federal government, it's not like the judge. If there's these sentencing guidelines that say you're going to get sentenced to 5 years, the judge has leeway between 4 and 6. In the state, the judge has leeway between 0 and 5. There's just it's a whole different ball game. And I remember the first time I got indicted, and they were like, it's United States of America versus Aaron Amuchastegui. And it was terrorism, racketeering, conspiracy, all these really, really crazy things. And they're reading out the statements, and they're maximum of it was 25 or 35 years for each charge or something crazy. And so we're like, hey, this isn't fair. My new attorney goes to them and says, hey, this isn't fair. Aaron was given a deal. Here's other contract law that says that he was given a deal. And as a result, this shouldn't happen. And they're looking through all of it. And we went and made this special recording of all the times when they mentioned the deal and all these different things. And the attorney for on the other side for the federal government said, well, you can go down that route and you might win. And if you win, you'll get off. But if you don't win, I'm going to throw the book at you with these other 5 charges, and you're going to be in prison for the rest of your life. Or I'll give you a deal where you can plead guilty to this inside the federal guidelines, and you will go to prison for a few years. And I had a lot of things come up over that year that really helped benefit me. So, because in that time, it was a year from the time I got indicted to the time I actually had to turn myself into prison.
Yeah.
21 years old, pleading guilty, turning myself into a prison in Southern California. Small little white kid from Southern Oregon that's never really seen the world gets thrown into a prison in Southern California. Wow, my life completely changed again, when we were there. So some of the best things that happened was my sentencing ended up only being 2 years because I had a lot of like really fantastic, unique things that happened from the time that I was indicted to the time that I got sentenced that helped me get some downward departures. They call downward departures to those guidelines. But it was a wild, wild experience, Jamie, and it changed my whole life.
How much was stolen?
Like $1,800 or something like that.
$1,800. That's it.
That's it. I had more money in a bank account in that bank than we walked away with.
Oh my God. So he steals. How did he steal it? Gunpoint?
Gunpoint. Yeah. Walking in, showing him a gun. They said, give me your money. They give it to us.
Is that the bigger deal? That it was an armed robbery?
That's a huge deal.
That is supposed to walking in with a note deal. Kind of thing.
Walking in with a note, it should have always been federal, right? The local district attorney, but you've seen those movies where like different people are like, "This is my case. This isn't your case."
Yeah, that's right? Kind of what it's like.
Everybody wants the case. Everybody wants to crack it themselves.
The feds are coming in. Yeah.
Right? The detective doesn't want. The local detectives wanted to be theirs. Like it's a weird thing that like comes out a little bit. But yeah, so the big deal with it was one, it was a bank. And two, it was, there was a gun. But there's also some benefits. Like at that time, there was like a special law for like, in Oregon for violent criminals, that there was like mandatory minimums in state for like, robberies at gunpoint. So like in one sense, like, I don't know, I would have much rather not gone. Right.
Yeah.
But it changed my life for the better. And it really was like, I wasn't innocent. Right. I had to come to terms with the idea of like, even though this isn't fair, maybe it is, or, just saying, hey, this is what I got to do and just going to make the most of it. But it put me on a great trajectory for the rest of my life that felt like it helped me be ahead of everybody else.
I'm curious, just a couple of things on this before, and I want to talk about prison and what you did after. But I'm just like in that moment. So this kid comes out, he says, hey, I did it. If you didn't drive, if you said, dude, we're calling the police right now, just bring the money back. Like if that, I'm just like, what could have prevented prison at that point? Anything?
No.
Even if you said, whoa, man, I was kidding. Like bring the money back in. Let's call the police. Like, hey, this was a joke. I don't know. Would you have avoided prison time in that regard?
I don't think so, man. I don't think there was a moment. I think the moment is before he gets out of the car.
Yeah.
Right before he gets out to go like, you know what? Let's not do this.
Yeah.
That was the last moment because then that was the only point it was still in my hands, right? The only point I was still there. Stuff is only in our hands for a little while.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's out of our hands. And that was the moment that I went from me having like some sort of say in it. I could have driven somewhere else to I no longer had a say in it. But I mean, it's illegal to plan a crime even if you don't commit it.
That's true.
Right? Like technically. So
what were you actually, what was the charge? Were you armed robbery?
It was aiding and abetting federal bank robbery.
Aiding and abetting. Okay, so what kind of prison does that put you in?
Federal prison.
Like maximum security?
So the medium security. And so they have minimum securities where there's actually like no actual offense. And it's like a pretty chill experience. But they don't let you do that you can't go there if there was a weapon used.
Oh, wow.
So because we were a weapon used, we were considered a violent crime. So we went to a prison for violent offenders. Which was crazy. But medium level, so there was a harder level. Medium level meant like, we didn't have doors on our rooms. We were like in like a big building that was sealed up. We had like, but then there would be like 50 people with almost like lockers and like bunks in there.
Yeah.
So more open room, whereas maximum security is everybody has a room that you're locked down in.
Like a barracks almost in a way?
It's like a military barracks, yeah.
Who's in there? Like what kind of people? You say violent criminals. Like what does that mean?
A lot of bank robbers.
Okay.
A lot of international drug dealers,
Gotcha.
People that are transporting stuff from other places.
Yeah.
There's so a lot of drugs because they hit the federal minimums back then. You remember like the late 80s, they started making that giant federal crimes. And so,
I had a guy on this podcast, Michael Santos. I don't know if you heard it or not, but he was early 80s, saw the movie Scarface, maybe mid 80s, whenever the hell it came. Yeah. Well, he saw it. And thought it was fascinating. He's like, oh, that's cool. And then like 3 weeks later, figured out a way to sell cocaine He would traffic it in from same thing. He's like, well, I can get it for this from Miami, and my friends will buy it for this in Seattle. So he created a trafficking what is it, like a ring or whatever. So he had like more than 5 employees. I forget. He went through it, like more than 5 employees or whatever, and it became it was under a statute at the time. No, not conspiracy. It was a kingpin statute. He was a kingpin. So he got 45 years, served 29 of them in maximum security prison because he was the kingpin. He's like, he's 2021. I thought that because I didn't touch it, like I never touched the stuff. I wasn't violent. I didn't hold anybody up at gunpoint, that I thought I was above it. Like all these people will get hit, but not me. And he's like, man, I didn't realize that I was the biggest offender. And
dude, it's a great point.
Right?
So the way the federal law works also is if you help someone commit a crime, you're convicted of the same crime. I was like, well, isn't it better that I didn't hold the gun? No.
Wow.
If he would have shot and killed somebody, I would have gotten charged with murder. It's could have been, so it is a crazy story, but it could have been way worse. But yeah, if you help someone else, you think that, you would think like there's various levels of it.
Yeah.
There aren't really various levels of crime.
Man, in prison, were you what were you subject to there? Fights, anything like that? You have to ever defend your life? I'm kind of curious. What was prison like for 2 years?
It's wild. Especially, I've got these old pictures that I should send you. Maybe you could put them up. But there's, it was wild when I first got there. Yeah. Very segregated. Out of 1,500 people there or something, there's 100 people that are white, right? And it's all very race driven. Races stick together. And it's based on all sorts of different things. And you're trying to find, unique. So, but people stick together, and they stick together for all sorts of things. So there are fights. There are the things like when you first get there, you have to, like somebody's going to challenge you to a fight, and you have to fight them because that's going to determine how it's going to be the rest of the time.
Wow.
How you're going to get treated the rest of the time. Are you somebody that like lets people beat you up, or are you somebody that fights back? I had like some crazy stuff where like God took over and just helped me though, because one of my first cellmates he was from he was in there for mafia stuff, right? So he's an Italian guy in there for mafia stuff. Everybody in there loves the mafia. They love people that were charged with being part of John Gotti's crew. Sure. Right. So because I was his roommate, like people were super friends with me for those first few months. So that really, really helped. At the beginning, because all criminals think other criminals are cool at different parts. There's, and then because I had a high school education, I was smart. The job they gave me was to be the GED teacher. Because not many people there had a high school education. Well, by being the GED teacher, the cool thing was I had all these guys that were my students. Well, these guys that were my students were really, really smart entrepreneur guys, right? But that were from some of like the craziest gangs in LA. Right, so really, really hardcore guys, but they wanted to get an education now. Sure. They wanted to better their life. They wanted to get their high school degree so then they could go take college classes because they had another 5-10 years left. They wanted to make sure they were there. Well, those guys that I was, their teacher and their friend, and we got to get super, super close to because every day we'd go to class and I would teach them for several hours a day. Then whenever everything went crazy, because a few months after I was there, Tino moves out. I no longer have this guy lives with a mafia guy. But then anything that happened was these guys were like errands with us. So there's these crazy pictures of me where I'm it's just surrounded by, just a ton of guys that are really hardcore guys. Sure. And you'd think, who's this small white kid in the middle of all, and that's when my growth spurt happened, really. The testosterone kicked in. It was like, oh God, you better protect yourself here. But whenever anything went crazy, man, they would say errands with us.
That's it.
And so when there were race riots and there were times when when things were going bad, they would stand outside my little bunk and they would tell people to keep on moving, and people would keep on moving.
Wow, man. That's crazy. Do you have any sense of where any of these people are today? Have you kept up with any of them?
Oh, yeah. My son's named after one of them, one of my roommates.
Really?
That were in there. So we keep up. There's a lot of us that keep up. Social media helps that. But none of our the closest guys that I was with, there's like 6 or 8 guys that I was really, really close to in there, and none of them have gone back. All of them are living their lives.
All doing well.
Yeah. All doing it as well as you can expect. And we get to chat. I've met up with a few of them a few times.
Yeah. Wow. Your parents through this time, your dad especially, what was this like for them? Have they ever articulated that?
Dude, it was really hard for them. Man, one, they had to feel really powerless, right? Maybe for the first time, because in the small town we grew up in, if they wanted to influence their kids, if their kids screwed up, they had a lot of influence and they could change stuff, or they could say like, hey, Aaron, well, whatever, right? This was finally a thing where they were powerless. There was nothing they were going to be able to do that's going to be able to help me.
Yeah.
They were amazing though, because the prison that I was in was like a 12 or 14 hour drive from where they lived.
Yeah.
And they would come down once or twice a month. They would drive down. They would come see me to come just sit and talk to me, play chess for like 3 or 4 hours to let me know that they loved me so much. And it was like, talk about like super embarrassing, right? Their son's on the front page of the paper, all the things. My mom's a superintendent of the schools. Like people are calling all over the news, all this stuff. Like, man, I couldn't have embarrassed them more. And they would have had any reason to like abandon me during that time. And it's absolutely not what they did. And and they're like my biggest defenders on everything whenever any of it comes up anymore. And it was something at the time I probably did not appreciate enough of just how now that I've like experienced more life and seen what it's like to parent and everything else. Yeah. And they were sure there for me, and they had every reason to not be. And man, I totally, like I said, was totally embarrassed them, and they had every reason to be, and glad that they hung out and stayed around.
When you were going through all this stuff before the bank robbery, you said you were kind of in a defiant mode, which I'm sure serves you now. We can talk about that, being sort of defiant, looking for other ways to do things that are outside the norm. Yeah. That's probably serves you a lot now. Would your parents have chalked that up to like, all right, look, he's just a teenager, he's doing stupid shit? Or were they, were they trying to, like, what were they doing in that time before the bank robbery? I'm sure they never anticipated you do something like that, but did they know you were selling drugs? Did they know how into drugs you were? Like, I'm kind of curious about that because, well, let's start there.
Yeah.
Where were
they? Were trying, so they knew, they saw it, they saw and I got to say like, hey, I'm still getting straight A's, right? So it's like I'm still able to pull off. So even though I'm like really screwing up over here, I'm still able to like keep it together over here, which there's something bad with that too. It's almost better if if everything falls off, you don't think you have a problem if most of your life is still fine. Yeah. Right. But if all of a sudden, like if it all falls apart, then like, oh, I better do something different. But no, they did not like it. They were trying to get me to stop. They would try to use whatever influence they could. And what that did was just, I think there's just nothing they could have done. Right. Because anything they used of like, hey, if you do this, because they got to the point where it's like, oh, we're going to take your car away if you do that because we're the other names on the car if you don't start doing this or start doing that. I think it put them in a really tough position. And like one of the times he did. Like he went and found even when I was living in Arizona, he saw my car was in town. I hadn't checked in, told him I was there. He just went and took his keys and took it home. Wow. And so they were trying desperately to help fix me, to help like encourage me, to help get me to change. But sometimes there's just so many lessons out there. Like this is the best, most successful people in the world can learn from other people's mistakes. Yeah. And the people that can, like, I admire you. And if you're listening and there's a chance to learn from someone else's mistakes, like learn from someone else's mistakes because that's like shows like pure wisdom. Yeah. I wasn't able to. Right. I had to learn the hard way. And they tried to stop that from happening. They tried to help me before it got worse. And no matter what they did, it just wasn't going to work.
Do you still need to learn from your own mistakes, or are you able to learn from others now?
I'm better at learning from others, but I still get really emotional when it comes to learning lessons, where sometimes I'm like, I know this is the right thing, but I don't like this outcome. I don't like this plan right now. So maybe I'll try to push through it a little bit more. But I've gotten better at it for sure.
Yeah. Is there a mistake recently you can think of that you had to learn the hard way?
Every time market change, I did layoffs again. I did layoffs. I have several different companies. You mentioned one of my companies. I have like 5 or 6. And in one of my companies, I did major layoffs in November. And really, I knew that I should have made the layoffs back in March. Right. So that was in my flipping company of buying stuff. As soon as the interest rates changed, our lines of credit went way up. The stuff that we were buying had slowed down. And at that point, I should have said like, okay, here's the cash flow. I'm paying $40,000 a month of my own money to keep this thing floated. I should have cut it off then. But that's where the emotions kick in. Yeah. And I've learned that lesson in 2007 when the home builder I worked for crashed. I learned that lesson in 2012 when I went out of business one of the times. And so it should have been easy this time. Sure. Right. By now I've been in business a long time, had a lot of failure. And now I did it much faster than before. Sure. By doing it 6 months after I should have instead of waiting. But that's the emotional part. Got it. Because especially when you have like employees that feel like family and you're responsible for their family, it is so hard to go like, okay, go find another job. Yeah. Yeah, no, I can imagine. No, that makes a lot of sense. What, with your own kids now, thinking back to how you were and what you put your parents through and all of that, how has that informed you as a parent? Like what are some things, like, is there something where you say, okay, my parents tried to
incentivize me in some way to not do the things I was doing. Do you parent in a different way given those experiences?
Yeah, I'm really honest with them about everything, right? So they know all my history, they know all my stuff. I tell them, go listen to my podcast, right? Like those are stories for you guys. I have 4 kids, right? And we've had a heck of a journey the last year with one of them, but my son is 7. My girls are 15, 13, and 12, right? So we're starting to get through this thing. I think our biggest mission, that what my wife and I try to go with, is we want them to be honest with us about everything. And we want them to know, like, so here's the thing. Pat gets back in the car.
Yeah.
Right? I should have called my dad.
Yeah.
Right? I couldn't have called the police yet. Right? Like you said, like, hey, if you'd have done that, would you got in trouble? But I should have called my dad. Because he could have helped me at that point. He could have made it better than it was if I was able to, like, be honest at that point. But I was too embarrassed. Right? There was all sorts of reasons and emotions, right? That he was expecting more out of me. It was embarrassing. Maybe I could get away with it, all these things. So, like, our hope with parenting is that if my kids are ever in a jam with anything, that they come to us. If they have questions about something, they come to us. They want to know about, like, sex, or what does this mean, or what does that mean? We have the craziest conversations that my wife laughs about. Like, the girls will ask her something and she'll tell them whatever, right? There's no secrets about anything, because we want them to know, like, we're their number one fan and we're on their team no matter what they do.
Yeah. Has that gone too far in any way? Meaning, have you seen where it's like, oh, okay, because I love what you're saying. What I hear you saying is, and we're about the same age. Our parents raised us, or at least mine did, where it's like, I'm the parent, you're the kid. There's this gap between us, and that gap doesn't close, right? Parent, kid. So I wouldn't have called my dad either in that scenario, right? Like, no way.
No way.
But I parent more in, like, we're in this together. I'll admit to my kids when I make a mistake, when I screw up, even, like, if I yell at one of them later, I'm like, buddy, I'm so sorry. And they're young, 7 and 4, 8 and 5, right? So, like, I'm more of that, like, let me, yeah, I'm your parent. I've got to set some boundaries, but that gap is much smaller. And as they grow, even at this age, it sounds like the same for you. Like, I'm going to be more with you. I'm here to guide you, not to discipline and be over the top of you. But I do worry for me, and I wonder if you've seen this, like, does it get too comfortable? Like, your example of, if you would have called your dad, you hope your kids would do that. Does it imply that they would be okay with getting into that situation because you did? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that there will definitely be cons with it, right? I don't know what they are yet. We haven't experienced it yet, but there will be.
I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
There are pros and cons to everything. And it's kind of like this whole parenting life experiment is just a giant experiment, and we'll get to know in 20 years if we got it right.
It's true.
Right? Like, I despised the way my dad parented me for like 30 years, right? And for the last 10, 12, I've been so grateful for it. From some of the stuff that he did for me when I was a kid that I was, like, so resentful for, and part of my acting out, now I go, like, that's part of why I'm successful. And so there are some things that I got to learn, like, some of the hard work type stuff that was forced upon me that really helped me in my life. My kids aren't having to learn that part right now. Yeah. And that's part of that will serve them and part of that won't serve them well. So I think as parents, some people will parent the exact same way they got it. But part of us as kids, we go, like, I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to parent better than that whenever anything goes wrong. I think it's human nature.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there will definitely be a cost to the way we parent. It could be that, yes, they'd be more open to do something that I would be like, I would, wish that they had chosen not to.
Sure.
Right? They may be bolder to go, like, well, dad will love us anyway, or dad did this, right? Even though they know, like, man, I haven't drank alcohol or done a drug or anything in, like, 22 years.
Wow, no kidding. I didn't know about the alcohol.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I won't have a drink, right? I don't even drink anything. And people are always like, why? Well, hey, I got sent to rehab way back then. And what first happened was, like, well, I had to stay clean for at least that year before I went to prison, because if I failed a drug test, it was going to get worse.
Yeah.
And then I was in prison, and plenty of people did drugs in there, but you just don't want to be one of those people.
Right.
And then when I got out, it was like for a couple of years having, like, drug testing me on probation. So by that time I had, like, been sober for like 4 or 5 years, and I just kept going. Right. And now that it's been 22 years, like, what's the point? Like, why make a health change on that? But, like, so they get to see that as my example now. So even though they say, like, they know, I'll tell them, yes, this is who I was, but I wish it would have been like this. And this is how I live my life today. So I think the best thing we can do as parents is try to live by example. And most of the time, that's what's going to be the thing in the back of their head. knowing, but yeah, the crazy stories of, hey, dad was crazy. We can be crazy too and still turn out okay. That could happen.
Sure.
That could totally happen.
Yeah, I worry about that with me as well. But let's go to post-prison. So you have a felony record then at this point?
Still have a felony record.
Still have it to this day. So after prison, what's the you go back to Oregon, what's the first thing that happens? What's the first business, all of that stuff?
I went to a school called Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And for construction management. So one of the last things in prison, so I was there for a couple of years. I'm like doing college classes. I get back. My plan is to go work for my dad in Southern Oregon, right? And we had tried to get this. I was helping him try to get this new hospital job, and essentially we didn't get the job because they said someone on your team needs to have a college degree and nobody does.
Oh wow!
So even though he had done the last job for them, they essentially said like, you guys don't have even though Tim built the other hospital. These people have credentials. They've got a bachelor degree in this. And so I'm like, I'm going to go to school down at Cal Poly and get my degree in construction management, come back and help my dad run his business. That doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
Well, man, I got down to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and it's 70 degrees and sunny and there's the beach there and it's like the land of milk and honey. And I just spent my last couple of years not living a very fun life and was like, this is amazing. Some of the advantages that I had working for me there that really gave me an advantage over everybody else is now I was 2 years older than everybody else. Yeah. And I had wasted like 2 years of my prime life. So I'm coming in a couple years older than everybody, taking the same classes. I know what it's like to screw up and lose it all. And I had to hit the ground running. These kids were like, hey, we have time to like make our decisions. I was like, I don't have any more time. I've already lost out on this. I need to be the best. I need to. So I was like, every time I'd go into class, I was thinking about like how much it was costing me. So I was like a really, really good student. I loved learning. At that time, I'd already worked in construction and doing that. So I knew what I wanted to do. And so by going and learning those like every day, it was like just super, like if you know, like college classes, if you know what you're studying them for, you can apply them right away. My accounting classes, I'm like, oh, I'm going to apply that this way. Yeah. Everything that I was learning, it was like, I'm going to apply this in real life. And so there was a couple like big competitions for home building at that time that were like nationwide. It's the height of the housing boom. And I won the competition 2 years in a row. Wow. Nationwide competition. It's a team event, but no team had ever had one person win it twice. Yeah. So my first year doing it, and the next year we won it. That was really cool. That helped me get really heavily recruited. And I remember calling my dad and going, hey, Dad, I know I was going to come back and work for you, but I've got all these really, really big companies that want me to go work for them. And based on my history and based on my record and everything else, I thought my dad was going to be, and selfishly, if he was being selfish, he would have said, no, I need you to come back and work for me. Right. Like, we missed out on some time. We were there for you. Time for you to come back. Instead, he was an amazing dad. And even though I'm sure it broke his heart, he said, that is so, so great. You should try to apply for these guys. Try to work there. It sounds like it's an amazing opportunity. I remember calling, expecting him to tell me, like, no or be sad. And I wasn't going to do it. And yes, I'm sure against his better judgment at that time, or just against his own self-worth, said, you should totally do it. I got a job working for a home builder. This is the height of the housing boom. Because of like how well I did in class, I was able to start in like a pretty high operations role for a big privately held builder. Wow. It was, when I first graduated, it was like houses were selling as fast as we could. This is housing boom, Southern California, Central Coast, near Santa Barbara. As soon as we finished the houses.
What year?
This was 2005.
Got it. Yep.
So like 2005, housing is awesome. Yep. We're building houses in like 60 days. They're pre-sold all the time. We're golfing 2 or 3 days a week. Job is easy. We're like running offices. It's so good. A couple years later, I had a really bad expectation of what life was like. My wife was a stay-at-home mom with our first kid. I'm making over 6 figures as a young guy with bonus options and all sorts of other things. Housing market all of a sudden comes to a halt. I had no idea, that it was really happening because it wasn't happening as much in the Central Coast. And we got a call. They said, we're going to lay off 70 people. There's 5 left, including you, including the 3 owners, right? And then 2 other people. You guys still have your jobs, but you got to move to Sacramento this weekend. Wow. And we're laying everybody else off. And it was like, oh, I kind of had known that the market was turning, but I didn't really know.
Why move to Sacramento? Why'd you have to go there?
Because that's where their corporate office was. And that's where they had the most of the houses. Sacramento was like foreclosure central.
Yeah. Buddy of mine had a house in Roseville, and he short-sailed it, but that whole area.
Roseville was one of the places we had. Yeah. So all of a sudden, I'm thrown into the crazy foreclosure crisis. I get my salary cut in half. My wife has to go to start working nights at the casino as a waitress. She's pregnant with our second kid, and we're trying to figure out all these new businesses around foreclosure. And we went from golfing a couple days a week to like doing manual labor to go finish we're going down to projects like with a hammer and like we're cleaning the houses, we're doing the detailing. The people couldn't pay contractors anymore because they were upside down and everything. We had to do a bunch of these crazy bank workouts for them to get out of that. But it was, I had learned how to do hard work before. I knew how to do construction work from before. And I knew that like from my dad selling fireplaces that there's sometimes you just got to suck it up and do it. Yeah. Like whatever it takes to like keep going to pay your bills. And and my wife knew that lesson too, because she was like, okay, I'll go back to being a waitress. And so it was those first few years were pretty wild.
What could have avoided that for you? I mean, knowledge of the market perhaps, or was it lifestyle? Like what could have made that a little bit more of a soft landing?
Yeah, we could have saved more money at the beginning. We were, even though I was making really, really good money, there's still this time where you're looking around at people around you, you're trying to keep up with other people.
Sure, yeah. Especially at that age.
Right? Yeah, it was that age. And when you're living in Santa Barbara, you don't know the difference between people that grew up there. You don't know the difference between family money, the people that already have wealth, right? That aren't doing the same battles that you are with different things. And so being more prepared for a rainy day. My mindset for a lot of years was like, it's only going to get better. I'm making this much money. It's only going to get better. Every calculation I ever made was like, I'll be making at least 15% a year more for the rest of my life.
So you pre-spend it.
Yeah. So you pre-spend it.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll do this now. I'll be able to pay that credit card off on my next bonus. And the first couple bonuses came in. Well, the next bonus didn't come in because the housing market crashed. I had no idea. So so being more prepared of like living within your means no matter what.
Do you violate that now at all? Do you get ahead of yourself ever? I know I do.
Yeah. So, well,
I'll admit it. Like I know that lesson, but that resonates with me so much because I'm probably a spender by nature. So I tend to trust in my ability to out earn my spend sometimes. That happens. I don't know if that's still
I'm a spender by nature. I think what I was going to say was there will come a point when income the income can actually be so much more than I could imagine spending.
That's true.
And so the best I've ever done is when all of a sudden, I started making way more than I could have imagined. And like I was a horrible saver. The only time I was actually able to save even from like 2009 to 2012 was when I was making so much money. I couldn't have outspent myself. But I learned really hard in 2013 what it was like to like relive within my means. And I think I've done a great job of being selective since then.
What happened then?
So housing market crashes in 2007. 2009, we're trying to find different businesses. We discover the foreclosure business, discover the foreclosure industry. We're trying to buy REOs.
We, by the way, this is you and the company.
Me and the four other guys that were working at this company.
Yep.
We're trying to figure out what to do with our skills during this tough time. It feels a lot like now in some senses where like there was a lot of houses listed for $500,000 that were short sales. Buyers could only afford $300,000. The only thing that was going to sell was for $300,000. Bank-owned foreclosures that had like concrete in the toilets and holes in the walls were selling for like $200,000.
Wow.
So we're trying to buy those off MLS.
Yeah.
I'm going, hey, we're going to buy these. We're going to fix them, sell them. We never got our offer accepted. First, they'd say, oh, we already accepted an offer yesterday. Then we started doing faster. And then we started making offers like within minutes of it coming out on MLS. Sorry, we already accepted an offer. We found out later that they had certain people that they wanted to sell the houses to.
Wow.
Yeah. The agents had their people that they knew if they gave them first dibs at these foreclosure ones, after they fixed it, they would rehire them to sell it. And so it's just a lot. We had no idea that we were fighting a battle we were never going to win. And so then one of the guys on the team said, well, what if we could buy these? What about this courthouse-step stuff?
Right.
This new software had just come out. We went to the courthouse steps and we tried to watch a sale to see what it was all about. There's 3 guys there. They're bidding on houses. Hundreds of houses are selling. They're not telling us anything. We're asking them about this process. And they're not sharing any secrets. We're like, and they're not actually mentioning addresses when they're doing sales. They're mentioning like names and like note numbers, all these things. We go start to research how to do it. A few weeks later, we were able to buy a house at trustee sale, at foreclosure auction. We pay it's a much longer story that I'll skip through, but we buy the first house for like $200,000. It sells for $300,000. We're like, oh my gosh, we have a legitimate business plan here.
Yeah.
For the next 6 months, we start figuring out more about that business, how it works. We find the secrets with it. We realized we had a lot of beginner's luck at the beginning, but after a few months, we were able to figure out the system to really master it. And then in September 2009, my second daughter was born about 6 weeks early, and we're at the mall. My wife's water breaks. She's having the baby. They have, Charlotte's born. We're all panicked. She's on oxygen, and I'm looking at her going, man, I let my family down. I can't believe that my wife was working nights, from nights meaning 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. as a waitress at a casino where everybody's smoking while she's eight months pregnant. And I felt like I let my family down. And I was like, I got to do something. So that was the moment I said, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go. I had now like seen this new business, this new opportunity. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to go all in on this one. My dad was my first investor.
Wow.
Helped me flip my next couple of houses. His business had gone out of business, right? He had money, but he was smarter than me. He had money in savings, right? He couldn't build custom homes anymore because there was a recession, but he had money. I talked him into I said, hey, invest in me. I'll give you 100% of the profits. I just want to show you this works. Because even though he was very supportive of me, that was a big ask to be like, hey, Dad, trust me on this new business plan. When you've been a successful business plan, I've been trying to give you advice your whole life. And this is a new business no one's ever done before. Right? 3 people had, but no one had done it the way that I was planning to, the way that I felt like I was inventing. He did really well in his first few houses. He sent an email to a buddy and said, hey, look at what my son did. That buddy emailed it to his financial manager. His financial manager called me and said, hey, maybe we should build a partnership.
Sure.
I present to a bunch of these guys in this room. I'm thinking I'm going to try to borrow a few $100,000. We start a giant fund. Over the next few years, we flip like 1,000 houses.
Wow.
We're making tons of money. Yeah. Investors are making tons of money. I don't have any mentors, so I'm like spending it on lavish pool parties and like expensive cars and expensive sunglasses and like, doing all the wrong things with it, not saving, not buying rentals. I tell everybody if I would have known about Gobundance in 2009, I'd be a billionaire by now because there was so much cash going in and out that was just getting wasted. So by 2012, we're the biggest show in town. We're the only people that, we were the biggest flippers. There were a lot of people doing the business by then, but we were still the best. Blackstone came and talked to me about joining them. They were coming into the market, talking about buying my company. But I was a young, dumb kid. I should have Googled who Blackstone was. I should have thought like, how are they bigger? I should have tried to think about their business plan. They said, we're going to come buy rentals and here's the plan. And like, if you don't join us, we're going to put you out of business. I was like, you're not going to put me out of business. Like I did this, I did that. Like even just our commissions alone, like I couldn't fathom, we're flipping 15, 20 houses a month. I couldn't fathom. And I said, all I need to do is 1 a month to still stay super successful.
Sure.
They did put me out of business. Right?
Did they offer to buy you? Did they actually make an offer to you to buy you? What was the amount? Do you mind sharing what the amount was?
Well, so it was mostly like a buyout at the beginning, then for stock options. But the other guys that ended up taking the jobs, I don't think they ended up with $10 million as payouts, but close to it.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was like, again, one of those hard things, like almost like the emotional time, because when they came to, I just had the Christmas party, didn't really want to like shut down my company and do different things. Also was too cocky. So I got put out of business, man. I got put out of business because I couldn't figure out, because I thought they were going to be running one business plan. They ran a very different one. The one that they ran was very, very successful. I learned a lot from them about what happens if you can buy a house for $100,000 if it's worth $200,000, what you can do to move the market to make it be $200,000, how to refinance it now with tax-free money. I learned everything that I did in the last 4 or 5 years was all lessons they taught me then when I was able to do things really, really big later. But I didn't know I was going to get put out of business. I didn't think they could. They did. I had heavy overheads. I had company cars. I had health insurance plan. I had all this stuff. I had too many employees, too much overhead. And I remember calling my wife one day and saying, hey, I need you to transfer money from your brokerage account over to this one so I can make payroll. And she goes, there's no money in that account. Like you transferred it last month. And that was the last. And it was like, oh my gosh, the beginning of that year, we have over $1 million in cash sitting in the bank. And now I don't, and I can't make payroll. And I got people that are at the office. That was harsh. The next 2 years, like we were like not only out of business, I had to like relearn and rethink like, oh man, what did I do? Man, if I could do everything over again, what I would do with the money, what I would do with like savings, I would have kept 100 of those 1,000 houses. My family, my relationship with my wife was also in shambles at that time because when you're like doing really, really good, you're getting super cocky and you're not like giving credit to everybody that helped get you there. You're like, no, I did this. And so I was making all sorts of bad decisions as a husband and as a dad and all sorts of things. So it was like 2 years of like repentance and wreckage and trying to learn from the past before I could figure out what was going to happen next.
What were you doing in those 2 years to earn? Did you go get a job at this point? Like what were you doing?
Yeah. So so a lot of times I was mowing my lawn a lot. As I was trying to kill time for a bunch of different things I was doing to like keep it going. I had bought a really crappy apartment complex in 2011 as like almost like a joke. But there were times during that year that the rent would help me pay my rent. I'd get like a $7,000 rent check on the months that it did cash flow. Some months it wouldn't cash flow though. So I'd always be wondering what's going to happen when I got it. Will this one help or not? I found a couple markets I could go flip houses in that were a couple hour drive from where I lived. That Blackstone wasn't in. It's like, oh, here's a secret area that I could, but they didn't have much volume.
Right.
So I could flip a house every couple months there, and then it would help pay the bills. And I remember In 2015, I'd applied for a job to be like a building inspector in the city of Napa and an Uber driver. And I was like, because I didn't have anything left at that point. I was like, I'm going to drive Uber and I'm going to see if I can get rides back and forth as I'm driving to Napa because it was a 2-hour drive from where I was living.
Yeah.
See if I can do rides back and forth, go get this normal job and that's it.
Wow, man. Wow. What today, I look at you, you've got the podcast, 4 or 5 businesses, 5, 6 businesses. We could talk about those. What changed? What was a pivotal point in all of this? You're talking, we're right around 2015, 2016 here. So was there something that happened that helps you kind of, escalate out of this? Like what was the next move for you?
I mean, the next part of the story is the exciting part. It's that part too for everybody that's like listening and thinking about their own ups and downs, like that there comes a moment in life where like the things that you've been learning and the things that you've been going through, like it's known. I made all my wealth, right, in like these really short periods of time. I think of like these 12 to 18 month periods that were just going really good. And I think of like 2009 to 2011, right? Huge amounts of money were made, right? But then I lost it shortly after that. So 2015, I'm applying for that job. I'm trying to figure out like what we're going to do next. I'm doing little hustles here and there. And a real estate agent sent me an email and said, hey, the apartment complex next to the one that you own.
The 11 unit?
Huh?
The 11 unit?
It was actually a 60 unit apartment complex.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But it was that first one that I bought in 2011.
Got it.
Yeah. So,
I see.
Gotcha. Yeah. She goes, hey, this one's for sale, but you have to act quick. It's scheduled for auction in 2 weeks. She sends me the rent rolls. I see the title report, scheduled for auction. And I go, wait, it's scheduled for auction? What's that like? What's that about? How's that work in Texas? And I start looking and I tell my wife, I'm like, I'm going to go try to buy this apartment complex at auction. Because by that time, my other one was starting to perform a little bit. I'm like, hey, if I can get another one of these and they actually perform good, like that could be enough to live off of. And so I fly out to auction. I have a line of credit that's left that from before, from when like everything went out of business, we were still able to pay people off, have resources. I show up I have $325,000 in checks. The opening bid comes out like $320,000. I'm ready to bid on this thing. The auctioneer's like, do you want to bid? She goes, going once, going twice. Do you want to bid? I say, no. And she goes, all right, sold, back to the bank, and walks away. And I turned around and what happened was I choked. I hadn't been successful now in a few years. 2015 to 2017, I'd learned all the lessons. If I got another chance, I'll be smarter with my money. I'll be better with my family. I won't let it get to my head. I'll keep rentals instead. Like I had all these lessons that I learned. And it was like, that was the moment that I like learned them all and was ready, but I didn't have the confidence back yet. So I thought, oh my God, I called my wife. I didn't bid on it. I should have. I'm like pretty heartbroken. I'm almost in tears. And she says like, what do you mean you didn't bid on it? Like we couldn't even afford the plane ticket for you to be out there. So I'm sitting there moping around, just being like sad before I'm leaving. And then another auctioneer shows up and he sells a ton of houses. And I hear him like calling out, names, selling for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a house. I'm looking around and there's nobody there, Jamie. There's nobody else standing at this auction. And I was like, oh my gosh. Central Texas, 2015 is like California in 2009. Yeah. California in 2009, I was one of the first 4 people doing the business. Right. We invented the business and we were the first people to do it at scale. Those other guys were like doing it small scale. We were the first ones to do like tons of stuff, like a home building operation. Like we did it at scale as a big fund. And so then 2015, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got my second chance. My whole mantra, if I ever get a second chance, I'm going to do this. 2015 was that second chance. So now I'm flying back and I'm discouraged by the apartment. I'm telling my wife, I think I've got another shot out here. I fly back out the next month on a Friday. I drive houses. I go to auction. I like do the title. I bid. I buy 2 houses at auction for way less than I thought I was going to have to pay for it. I go to Home Depot. I buy a drill. I go drill out the locks. I'm like taking pictures. I jump back on my plane to California. I schedule it. I sell it. So the first like 5 or 6 I flip. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is working. This is working again. I'm flipping houses again. And then I went.
Just to flip, like you do the work. You actually do the flip, or are you saying you buy them and flip them immediately after
So that we would buy them. I would hire painters.
You would rehab.
We would rehab them, and then we would sell them. And so in those first few months, all of a sudden I made a lot of money again. Yeah. And it was like, oh my gosh, when you go from making hundreds of thousands of dollars a month to zero, to all of a sudden like doing well again, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so great. But the big difference I did from like 2015 to 2020 then is we started buying a ton of houses. I'd fly out and I'd buy, at least 10 houses a month on average. And I'd flip 1 or 2 and I'd keep the rest as rentals. And And that was like with some of the partners, one of the partners I had when I did my fund back in 2009. Some of it was with banks this time. Some of it was other, partners, because I still didn't have enough money to buy them all. So I still had to find people, beyond just the line of credit. But, I said I didn't want the high ups and downs anymore. I want something nice and easy. I was going to do a bunch of singles. We're going to buy a bunch of houses in Texas, hold them as rentals. Housing prices will never go up in Texas, but at least these rentals will. And I remember being like 9 months in and having like maybe 60 rentals and thinking like, this is really, really hard. And the cash flow was like $6,000 split between like me and my partner and the investors at that time. And I'm still flying. I'm like, this is a hard battle. 2020 values went crazy, right? So we made big bets. By when 2020 hit, we had 500 or 600 houses.
Wow.
Out here.
Wow. Average purchase on those 500-600 houses.
$100,000.
Average value today.
250 or 300.
No shit. So 3x.
Yeah. So we got to learn from Blackstone about what a cash out refi is.
Yeah.
And how when you do that, you can do that tax free and be able to buy more assets with it. And so like, man, that's a great part of the story. I got to learn all these different things. Then 2021 hit, and 2020 was like a big hit. January 2021, some people were slowing down. They were thinking, all right, that was crazy. The market just went crazy the last 8 months, but it's going to slow down now. And everyone's like, it's peaked. It's going to crash. January 2021, sales were really slow. And we looked at the data that we saw, and we're like, well, Biden got elected. We know he's going to throw a whole bunch more money into the market. And I remember texting this real estate agent I know, and I said it's either like 36 million or 46 million. I said, we need to buy $36 million in houses in the next 60 days. Send me everything on MLS, dated 1980 and newer. I told him, send me every listing on MLS. That was the Blackstone move. They bought everything at auction back in 2012. Plus they bought everything on MLS. They bought the whole market.
Wow.
We're going to buy everything. And by doing so, if you buy everything, it automatically pushes values up. And we bought a ton of deals during that time. And it paid off really, really big too. But those were those moments. I remember telling my wife, January 2021, like, people talk about, I should have been buying a house in 2009 at the first foreclosure crash. Like, these opportunities come. January 2021, I said, I think this will be the biggest opportunity in my life because I see the market. I have the prediction of what's going to happen. And now I have an unlimited amount of resources, banks, lenders, and people that want to invest in me. Like, we're going to go big. The first time in foreclosure in 2009 didn't go big enough, really. Yeah. 2015 went as big as I could, but didn't have the ability. This was finally where it was like,
it's all together.
Now it's all together.
So let me just unpack. Central Texas, by the way. Is this Central Texas?
We're in Central Texas right now.
Texas. So you're buying in the Austin, San Antonio?
Within an hour drive of Austin.
An hour drive of Austin. Wow. Okay. And we all know what's been happening in Austin from a real estate perspective. So you buy $36 million worth of housing in January of 2021.
Yeah.
$36 million worth of housing. And this is between you, how many partners, investors? What is this, a fund that you raised?
All of that. So some of it was with lenders.
Yep.
Some of it was just me with lenders, me and my wife. Some of it was with me and a couple partners that are high net worth individuals. A lot of them are with this fund, the same people that we made money with in 2009, 2012.
Yeah.
Before we went out of business. A unique thing about those that we learned at the time too was there was January 2021, we would go in and start buying all these new home neighborhoods. We'd buy the whole neighborhood. Every house from every builder, every duplex from every builder. They wouldn't be finished until October 2021. Well, by the time they were finished, they were worth 25 to 40% more than we were in escrow at.
Sure.
Right. So we were automatically getting to buy them with huge equity, sometimes cash out refis at purchase.
Sure.
Right. So it was just this really crazy time, but we made a really, really giant bet at a time when maybe some people thought it was too late to get into real estate.
Oh, wow.
We made a giant bet. Because mind you, January 2021, prices were 40% more than they were when COVID hit.
Yeah.
By that time, we had just seen like the biggest housing increase ever over a 9-month period, and we like $1 million down.
Well, so give me an economic lesson here, because my brain is rolling right now. So January 2021, you say Biden's elected. You know he's going to pump the economy with money. He's going to print a whole bunch of money. Why is it then that you said, okay, Central Texas prime for me to buy $36 million worth of real estate? Get a little more deep on that if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Teach me on this.
Cool. So like interest rates were really low
back
then. And interest rates were lower than like what average inflation was going to be. What happens when people talk about inflation, hard assets are what goes up in value. So what inflation means is it's like you used to be able to buy a Whopper for $1 and now it costs $2 to buy that Whopper. Well, as we spend more money on things, it's still like that physical. It's it's like, or a car or anything else. We just know we're going to spend more money on things. The dollar is worth less. So a house that's worth $100,000 is now going to take $130,000 to buy it because money is worth less. And it's worth less everywhere.
So you're projecting that variable.
We're projecting
first.
that.
Gotcha.
So you're trying to figure out what assets out there are going to essentially would keep a normal value if it wasn't for inflation. Now, things like computers and like TVs and things like that, those don't because of technology.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of things you could go buy during that time that wouldn't go up in value because technology does the opposite. Cars would be very similar. Like some weird things happen in 2020 where cars seem to gain value, but they shouldn't. Right. Normally, a car would not be that thing that's going to gain value during inflation because its depreciation is going to outpace inflation. But houses, the depreciation didn't do that. So he said, hey, there's going to be inflation where the dollar is worth less. Interest rates are low, which automatically means that the price of housing will go way up. Mm-hmm. First-time home buyers, when they buy a house, they will give you all the money the bank will let them.
That's true.
The bank will say you can spend up to 40% of your income. Mm. You are qualified to spend up to $225,000 to buy a house. They don't go looking for $150,000 houses.
Right.
They go looking for $225,000 houses. Well, the crazy thing about 2021 is they're like first-time home buyers, you're qualified to buy a house for $700,000. What? First-time home buyer could buy a house for $700,000? Yeah. So and that was on a basis of wage inflation plus interest rates, things like that.
Wow. Okay. So now flash forward. So we're 2023. Your projections have come true. A lot of money in the market. Inflation goes crazy. Interest rates start climbing. Now what? What are you seeing now? What's happening now that interest rates have gone up significantly in the retail residential market?
That was really, really hardcore. We started to see it in January and February. We got almost all of our stuff refinanced, but by March 2023. We had some stuff that didn't.
March 2023 or
2022? Sorry, 2022.
Okay, I was going to
say about a year ago. Yeah, like a year ago is kind of when rates started going crazy, and you could no longer get any good rates on really long-term debt as an investor.
Right.
You can still get a 30-year fixed. First-time home buyers can still go get a 6% mortgage today. But from a corporate level, there's just different lending standards. So we got most of our stuff refied, but we're looking at stuff right now on an analysis of, housing prices in Texas now are down, 30% from where they were a year ago.
Sure.
Depends on the asset, but multifamily, another thing that happens when rates go up that high is cap rates just go up. So you can have an apartment complex that was worth, $10 million a year ago because cap rates were 5%.
Yeah.
That is now worth $7 million because cap rates are 7%.
Right.
Nothing's wrong with the apartment. Rents are the same.
Sure.
Everything's great. Maybe rents even went up 10 or 15%. It is worth less because cap rate changes. So in housing, we've seen there are price corrections, right? But the reality is there's a lot of houses listed for $500,000. The first-time home buyer can only afford $300,000. The houses in that neighborhood that sell for $300,000 will sell. Mm-hmm. The $500,000 ones just aren't selling. Now, those people don't have to sell. They've got lots of equity. They've got really low interest rates. They don't even really want to sell unless they get $500,000 because they'd have to buy a $300,000 house to get the same payment again.
Yep.
So it's this weird stalemate. And so housing, even though the prices of homes are a lot lower, we're not projecting any crazy foreclosure crisis coming because most of those people just won't sell.
Are the prices of homes lower compared to, how do I explain this? So I mean, and this is just a behavior you heard, right? A year ago, houses were selling for 20, 30, 40% above asking price, right? So that, but once that's locked in, that becomes the price of the property. So when you see a 30% correction in residential, are we back to 2 year ago pricing? Is that kind of what it is? Is it that the prices have gone down, or is it just that the fluff that was added on top in the last year or so where people were just throwing money at over asking price on how, are we just in a place where the housing prices are what they should have been anyway?
Yeah. So we're at prices where they were probably 14 or 15 months ago.
Okay.
Right. So but prices were going up like crazy at that point. Right. So it'd be 14 or 15 months before the peak. So our peak was in March.
I get you. Yep.
So now we're about, so prices are like what they were 2 years ago. So if they didn't go up so crazy, so we're not as low as they were in 2021.
Right.
We're not to where they were when we were buying those duplexes that we bought for $300 that were worth $420 when we closed. They're worth about $400 now.
Yeah.
Right. So still a lot of great deals. If you bought a house in 2021, you're still in really great shape.
Yeah.
But if you bought one in 2022, we are now definitely year over year declines.
Yeah.
And year over year declines at 30 to 40% on that value.
What do you I'm going to put on your economic, you study this data.
I study it like crazy.
What happens in the next year, 2 years? What are you projecting?
Yeah. The commercial side is going to be a lot worse.
Yeah, I believe that.
The commercial and retail is going to be a lot worse. There was a ton of people that were raising money for value add multifamily that didn't really know what they were doing, had never really done it before, never really done it at scale. And they were able to raise a lot of money. And I remember being so jealous like a year or two ago, Jamie, because it took us a long time to raise a lot of money. Yeah. And we do a really, really good job. I'm an operator that's been around for a long, long time. And we give great returns, but we couldn't touch the returns that people were offering. Yeah. And was thinking, one, how could you offer those returns? Because it's not possible. And then two was like, how are you convincing people that you can offer those returns when there's guys like me that do this all day long for years that can't promise that? Yeah. Right. It's like, what is really different? So we've got a bunch of those and a bunch of people that bought assets in the last year or two that had balloon rates on them. So they've got 12 to 24 month debt. The plan is buy the asset, fix it, get it better, and refinance it. And their plan was to refinance it at a 5 to 6% interest rate. Well, now that apartment can't trade for that. It's going to only appraise, they're only going to be able to get like a 7 or 8% interest rate. And now it's appraising for 25% less than they bought it for.
It looks good though, right? Oh, we're projecting 5%, 6% of the back end. Oh, rates are 2.5%, 6%. That's doomsday. You projected right.
Yes, absolutely. They go, if you look at some of those old presentations, people say worst case scenario. Yeah. What if we only gain rents by this much and rates go all the way up to 5 3/4? Right. Nobody was thinking about cap rate valuation of your apartment can be perfect. You could have bought it a year ago, 100% occupied, and it could be 100% occupied the whole time. You could have raised rents 10% and it's worth 10 to 20% less today. Period. Yeah. Like you didn't do anything to change the asset value. So the commercial industry, we're going to see a lot more of those foreclosures. We're going to see people trying to get rescued. 3,200 units in Houston just foreclosed on. Just got foreclosed on. We just posted on that. The hundreds of millions of dollars of stuff, and those investors that were in that are just toast. Yeah. And most of them aren't people that are like when those properties are getting foreclosed on. They aren't big people with lots of money getting foreclosed on. They're people that were like, it could be a Gobundance member, decide to invest $100,000 on somebody. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think anybody that's trying to present a multifamily value add deal right now, I would not recommend anybody invest in any sort of thing like that right now, unless it's super, super distressed. Unless they're coming and saying, these people bought it for $12 million a year ago and we're able to buy it for $7 million, right? Because we're taking them out at their debt, right? Like those are the only sorts of deals. If it doesn't have if it's not down 30 to 40% from values a year ago on their purchase, I would not invest in any of those. Does the debt matter in that regard? In other words, are you talking about a value add deal with short-term debt? Or what if you have a value add deal with a 5-year or 10-year balloon on it? So our plan is we're selling anything that doesn't have at least 5-year debt on it right now. Got it. Because we think everything that doesn't have 5-year debt will be worth less. And we're analyzing what are assets that we want to own in 10 years. Because you can get 5 to 7 1-arm. We're putting 7 1-arms on everything we can right now, even though they're over 7, you're over 7% for those 7 1-arms right now. Any asset that I want to own in 10 years, I'll put a 7 1-arm on because sometime in the next 7 years, I think that I will probably get a rate that I can lock into for longer. And that even if we go down another 15 to 20%, we will be balanced back out. I remember in 2005, houses went from 700,000 to 250 in a neighborhood outside of Sacramento. And I said, it'll never get back up to $700,000. And 10 years later, it did. It did, yeah. Right? And it was unfathomable to think that it could ever get back to that on that sort of a huge gain. So so 10 years is a long time. 7-1 debt's gonna help the most. So I say single family, if you're going to buy something that works with 7-year debt on it, I wouldn't buy anything with short-term debt if you're going to hold it long-term. And I wouldn't buy anything for long-term unless you want to own that one in 10 years. And I would not invest in a normal value add deal anymore. Interesting. What are you? It's about 1:23. I know you got to go in about 15 minutes here, so we'll wrap this sooner than that. Much sooner than that. I talk too much. No, dude. This has been amazing. Honestly, I mean, anybody that's watching on YouTube, just drop a comment. This has been incredible. Are you kidding me? Every bit of it has been an incredible story, incredible insights. So I feel like I need to ask you. So SVB collapses, Signature Bank collapses. Fed a week later raises the rates marginally, a quarter point. Where do you see that going? I mean. If you were to ask me, and I do not do the data study that you do, I'm just going to give you fuck it, kind of pull it out of the sky because I heard 6 different podcasts, and I'm going to, pull this stuff together and say, I see rates being flat in the next Fed meeting, and they're going to start dipping by the end of this year. What say you? Am I wildly wrong, or is there any data to support my off the cuff thesis? We got to put all the disclosures on this thing of Aaron makes a bunch of bold predictions and gives you a whole bunch of advice, but follow at your own risk. People. Saying right, I'm saying follow at your own risk because but what I can tell people is what I'm doing. right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
And that's the reality. As I make these predictions, like I'm doing it. A buddy of mine said, "Hey, should I sell my house right now?" And it's like a $7 million house here in Austin. And he's like, "Should I sell my house right now? I want to buy another one. Is it going to be worth less or worth more?" And so it's not worth what it was a year ago, all this stuff. And I just told him, I said, "I'm selling everything that doesn't have 7-year debt on it. And so if you don't want to own that house in 10 years, sell it now. Because next year, I don't think it's going to be worth more than it is today. And, you know, and it might in several years and all that stuff." So like your question about like, what are the banks going to do? We finally got some inflation slowing down numbers.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
But this Fed, they want to break the economy, and they've said it. They said, one of the things that they said was they have the tools to build it back up. They know how to fix everything and make everybody and the economy go like crazy. They did it in 2020. They can bring interest rates down to nothing. They can make it easy for people to get money.
Yeah.
Think back in 2020 about like all those economic incentives where everybody's like, "Hey, every person in the world just got $1,500.
Yeah.
And if you could fill out this piece of paper, you'd also get $10,000. And like people with business, I heard of people getting $1 million checks that were forgiven. You didn't have to pay it back. $1 million to your business. Like crazy stuff that happened back then. That's what they do to fix it.
Right.
So the Fed knows we can fix this if we break the economy and we put everything down. What they don't like is they want to see, now that we're finally seeing like supply counts of new home construction get really, really huge. And if you look at these old Fed charts, you go, every time it's peaked like that, we've seen huge recessions afterward. I put it on the screen at the Gobundance thing. We did the bull versus bears. It just showed kind of that changing. I think the Fed's going to keep going. I think we're going to see more interest rate changes. I've had several lines of credit that I have that banks have said, we're not going to renew the line of credit anymore. I've got several that have been dragging their feet for the last 4 months. They were supposed to renew 4 months ago. I had to pay them off. And I also have like savings accounts. So then I just messaged one of them before coming in. It's like, "Hey, I'm pulling my savings account if you're not going to renew that line." And he's like, "Well, I could probably get it done in another month." I'm like, "Cool, I'll pull the savings account then for another month, and then we'll put the stuff back in." I think the Fed's going to keep raising rates, and I think you know, at least through the end of the year, until they see some of the other data that's hurting them. So like they're seeing inflation come down, and they're seeing it come down in like oil, right? Well, now as a result of that, you've got in the Saudi Arabia area, right? The OPEC. They've decided that they're going to limit the amount of oil production in order to drive the cost of oil back up.
Yeah.
They see our inflation getting better, and they also see the rest of our economics collapsing. So they're going to tighten up oil to bring our oil prices back up.
Sure.
So even though oil came down, that's like a economic warfare that's happening with OPEC. That they don't want our inflation to come down because they don't want our Fed to stop. Yeah. They're going to drive oil prices back up, so our Fed has to keep raising the rates. There's still plenty of employment. There's still plenty of people getting jobs. They aren't getting paid the same, but people can go get jobs when they're out there. They can't buy as big of a house, but there's still some people that are buying. Because the people aren't selling houses, they're not seeing the same number of they're not seeing huge price drops necessarily, because there's just not a lot of stuff that's actually selling.
So what is breaking the economy by their definition at this point then? What's the variable? What's the factor?
Yeah. So they look at, they've got like 9 different things they measure, but housing prices is one of the things they measure. Unemployment data is one of the things they measure, and then the cost of everything. And I think what they've really looked at is housing drives a lot. And so housing starts is one of the things they've looked at. Housing starts has now like come to a stop, and the housing supply is the biggest that it's been since 2000. The new home housing supply is the biggest it's been since like 2005.
Wow.
Right. So but I think they want to see income go down. I think they want to see the average income go down and see unemployment go up. Because what will happen if that happens? Then people will lower prices of things.
Yeah, that's true.
Essentially, people will give you all the money they have. It's back to the idea of the house. Same thing if for dinner and lunch, people are going to give you all the money they have. The only way that they stop going and eating at that restaurant is if they can't afford to anymore.
Right.
Once they can't afford to, then the restaurant has to lower their prices of stuff because the cost of everything got higher during inflation because everybody had extra money.
Sure.
So they need income to go down, unemployment to go up, and then housing prices to correct.
Housing prices are on the way to correcting.
They're on the way to correcting in like I would say 35 states. There's 15 states that are outliers that are outperforming. Like Washington, D.C. is a great example because the government's getting bigger.
Sure.
Florida's a good example because people are moving from other places. But 35 states, it's housing is definitely being
no doubt. So when and how does that happen? Where where unemployment starts to tick up a little bit because, interest rates are too high, cost of borrowing money for a corporation, they got to make cuts or whatever the case may be. When does that happen?
Say it again.
You're saying essentially the other variables that need to break are unemployment needs to go up. We need to have more unemployment and lower income. I don't know where that data is right now. Like unemployment seems like it's pretty flat, low and flat. Is there any indication that in short time, in the next 3 months, that unemployment will tick up? Is there any indication that average income is coming down? Like how close are we to these variables in place that may break the economy coming to fruition?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a little bit tougher to guess. One of the toughest things about the data is really you don't know if you've gotten the results for about 6 months. Meaning every time they raise the interest rates, this is the thing. I did a big, a lot of reels about this. I want to say maybe 9-10 months ago. And at the time when they were raising and people said they're going to stop raising. And I said, we've got 18 more months of raises because what happens is it'll take like 12 months for the damage to actually happen. So it feels like the damage has happened now.
Right.
It actually feels like the stuff they wanted to correct has happened in a lot of the things that I see. Wealthy people getting foreclosed on, like the CRE market getting changed, like a lot of different things. So I think that the damage has been done, but it takes the Fed and the statistics another 6 months to actually show it. Because what we see is like the ones that are standing out to us, right? Like think of like, there's going to be somebody in your life right now that's a really successful business person that like just got foreclosed on, or like just lost money on a good deal. And like when you think of like, wait, if I know one person, that means like it's going to get. So I think right now we're seeing the damage. The data won't represent it for another 6 months. That's when they'll start lowering. I think by the end of the year, people say, well, like election year, Fed doesn't control that. Like Fed doesn't care who gets elected,
right?
On that stuff. So I think it'll be through the end of the year. I don't think we're going to see stuff starting to slow. I don't think we'll see rates coming down by the Fed until 2024, January 2024.
Sure.
But remember that impacts commercial loans. You can still have 30-year mortgages maybe a 30-year mortgage is going to cap somewhere between 6 and 7. And I think it's going to be at between 6 and 7 for a long time.
Yeah, sure.
Like sometimes you can get it under 5 if you do a buy down. But if somebody's looking at rates, I think for at least the next 12 to 18 months, 30-year mortgage is going to be 6 to 7%. And I think your commercial borrowing rate's going up.
Interesting.
It's going to be really interesting to look at this in 6 months to go, how wrong was Aaron or how right was Aaron? Because today I gave you my pretty bold predictions on stuff.
No, I love it. I love you put yourself out there with that. So, all right, we got to be respectful of your time. I'm going to ask you the last question from the Gobundance card game. And here's the question. What would your employees say are your greatest opportunities for improvement?
Man, I always have this fear that I'm an asshole. Asshole is a strong word. I get like little OCD, a little manic, where sometimes I forget about the emotion and sort of things. Or sometimes I'm so in a hurry. I've got a million different things going on. Like today, you ask me some questions, and all of a sudden I just rattle, where like there's no more emotion in it. So I can quickly come in and forget to go, how's your day? How are you doing?
Sure.
I can be very matter of fact. Hey, you messed that up. That cost us $15,000. We can't be doing that. Hey, we need to do this a little bit different. Hey, why did you screw up that? And I'm in a limited amount of time to manage different companies are coming in for these things. So what I tend to see the most is the errors. So I can come to a production meeting and I'll see like the 4 errors that should never happening, and I'll be able to spot them. And I'll be at like 1 production meeting out of 4. And they'll be like, how did you see that? And I'm thinking, how did none of you see that? And then it frustrates me because I'm like, why do I have to come to the meeting? Like for you to catch this, someone else should have caught this before. And so I see the problems more than I see but hey, you guys are doing a great job. So at the end, I'll try to give speeches to bring it back. Hey, you guys are done good. I'm really, really proud of you. We just need to correct those few things. But I don't do enough of the emotion of like, hey, how are you doing? Hey, how's your life going? A lot of times, sometimes they're like, they work hard for me. They haven't seen me in person for 2 weeks. They'll see me in person really quickly. And I'm very matter of fact, like, hey, we got to do this. We got to do better this. And then I'm out and they're thinking. So I know that that's something that I know that I should improve on it. I don't know if I see it improving anytime soon because my brain's just a little bit weird.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, and I will ask you this real quick. Gobundance, that was the 2016 you said you joined. How is that factored into your ability to build wealth, lifestyle, all of that stuff? Just give an idea on that if you don't mind.
It's the biggest game-changing experiment ever. I've doubled my wealth every year. And like that's like the old penny trick, right? I've doubled it. I've doubled the horizontal income.
How? Like, what is it about GoBundance that's gotten you that? Just, I mean, it could be, it doesn't have to be very tactical, but
there were a lot of, so I mean, some of the tactics was like thinking about horizontal income as being measurable, thinking about having goals and like backing it up to like how you can get there. Now thinking about making your goals bigger, right? So when I first joined, it was like, hey, if I could get $15,000 a month in horizontal income, I'm going to retire. That's all I ever need, and it helped me to build bigger dreams to keep going. The brainstorming with other people inside it. Hey, this is my problem. I've got a few guys that are my great buddies in Gobundance that I do a lot of international trips with. And we talk about, it's like our annual board meeting where both of us will come with like our list of big problems and big questions. It's that learning from someone else's mistake and someone else's like experience now.
Makes sense, yeah.
It's like that thing that we've talked about before, and just getting in the rooms of going like, hey, what if the idea of 2021? Well, what if we actually bought as many as we possibly could?
Right.
What's the most we possibly could? Okay, what if we bought 3 times that? What would that be like? Those sorts of bets that we made January 2021 only come because of talking to guys in Gobundance that talk about like big bets like that. Sure. So I think, I mean, I've got my own mastermind that I do. I've got the, for real estate agents, I've got a lot of other stuff. The whole reason I have that is because Gobundance absolutely changed my life more than like anything else. It helped me go from being a guy that was doing this alone. I was fighting the entrepreneurial battle alone. And I joined Gobundance the first time. I was like, okay, this is actually a team sport now. Yeah. I'm no longer doing this alone. There's a bunch of guys that do know like me. Not feeling alone is huge, especially in my life and my story, right? Feeling like somebody gets me, somebody understands me. I can be who I am. I don't have to be a drug dealer for somebody to like me, right? I can just be my weird self and have it all work out, fitting in for the first time ever. Yeah. And then it gives you the ability to really have permission to be your best ever.
Isn't that that's the ROI I can't articulate to people? Like I can point to deals I've done, I can point to businesses and all of that income I've made as a result directly of being in Gobundance. But the ROI I can't calculate is what you just described. It's the ability to show up as my whole self in a room and, admit, like I said, like, okay, how does that work? I don't know, right? Like, whereas in the regular world, it's like, oh, you don't know? What do you mean you don't? I don't know. There's a conversation I can have with people in this group in Gobundance that I just can't have with anybody else. And I can't quantify the ROI on that. Never been able to. So
yeah, it's fun. I mean, I have one partnership with one Gobundance member, right? I don't have a ton. I don't have a bunch of deals. I don't have a bunch of investments. I have one guy in Gobundance that I partner with on stuff. The rest of it, I choose to not do deals in Gobundance because if I mess up a deal, I want to come to Gobundance. I want to come to my buddies here and go like, hey, I messed something up. How do I fix this? Yeah. Right. And I knew that would complicate it. So yeah. So the ROI is way more about knowing that like, yeah, if I'd had Gobundance in 2009, 2010, I'd be a billionaire. That's because amazing. I had the resources, but I needed mentors to teach me what to do with them.
Yeah, makes sense. Where do people follow you? Learn more about, where do you want to direct folks?
Yeah, I love to chat with people on Instagram. That's my favorite place to talk. Like people see, I answer my messages. I chat with people. We do voice memos back and forth. I host the Real Estate Rockstars Podcast where I talk about a lot of the stats. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, the predictions I do a lot of that on Instagram Reels and posts like that. But the Real Estate Rockstars Podcast, my Instagram is at Aaron Amuchastegui. I have stuff where I have online courses where people learn how to buy foreclosures. I've got some masterminds for people that want to be investors and things like that are like, that not at the Gobundance level yet. But yeah, just come talk to me on Instagram. I'm happy to answer the questions.
Amazing, man. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate you.
Thanks for the invite. Thanks for flying all the way here.
Just for you.
Just for me.
Just for you.
All right.
My pleasure.